Welcome to HOA Rulebook. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina because I wanted to stop renting and build equity. I work in operations, and Vista Verde Owners Association sold itself as a gated community where standards mattered. Instead, it became a gated community where the portal is used to shame residents. Heather Johnson, the HOA board president, stood on my driveway at 9 at night with a phone held inches from my face, filming me while she screamed that my motion light is called a nuisance and that I was invading everyone's privacy. "Read the standards," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She told me I had 24 hours to remove the camera or face daily fines, and when I tried to explain that the angle only covered my own property, she cut me off. "The decision is final," she snapped, and then she posted a photo of my house on the portal with the caption, "This resident thinks rules do not apply to him." I installed the cameras 3 months ago after someone keyed my car in the driveway. One doorbell cam, one small unit above the garage angled to cover my car and my front door. Nothing fancy, nothing invasive. I checked the HOA covenants before I mounted them. There was a line about exterior modifications requiring approval, but cameras were listed as a permitted exception as long as they did not record neighboring properties. I took screenshots of the page and filed them in a folder on my laptop. I thought I was covered. I was wrong, because Heather decided that my motion light is called a nuisance, and she had the board behind her. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my door. It was printed on Vista Verde letterhead, and the language was blunt. The notice stated that my security cameras violated community standards by creating an atmosphere of surveillance that infringed on the reasonable expectation of privacy enjoyed by neighboring residents. The cure period was 24 hours. If I did not remove the cameras, I would be fined $50 per day starting at midnight. I read it twice, then I called the management company. The woman who answered said she would look into it and call me back. She never did. I posted a response on the portal that afternoon. I kept it polite. I explained that my cameras only covered my property, that I had checked the rules, and that I was happy to adjust the angle if anyone had a specific concern. Within an hour, Heather replied with a comment that accused me of deflecting and ignoring the concerns of the community. She tagged 3 other board members, and 2 of them piled on with replies that echoed her language almost word for word. One of them said that residents who refuse to comply with reasonable requests demonstrate a lack of respect for their neighbors. I watched the thread grow, and I felt my chest tighten. I was being painted as the problem, and I had no idea how to fight back without making it worse. That night, the portal exploded. Someone posted a grainy screenshot from my doorbell cam. It showed Heather standing on my porch 2 weeks earlier, leaning close to my neighbor's window with her phone out. The timestamp was visible in the corner. The caption read, "Funny how privacy only matters when it is her being watched." The post had 60 comments by the time I saw it, and half of them were from people who had their own stories about Heather showing up unannounced to photograph violations or peer into yards. I did not post the screenshot. I have no idea who did. But the damage was immediate. Heather went silent on the portal for 12 hours, and when she came back, she posted a long statement accusing me of hacking her devices and using my cameras to harass board members. She demanded an emergency hearing. She said the board would meet in 3 days to consider additional penalties, including a lien on my property if I did not comply. I called my neighbor Greg the next morning. He lived 2 doors down, and he had been targeted too. Last year, Heather fined him $300 for parking his truck in his own driveway because she said it was commercial equipment. It was a stock Ford F-150 with a toolbox. Greg told me that Heather hated cameras because she could not control what they showed. He said the board had been using selective enforcement and daily fines to push out anyone who questioned their authority, and that I was next on the list unless I fought back. He offered to come to the hearing as a witness. I told him I would take any help I could get, and I started building my case. I pulled every document I had, screenshots of portal posts, copies of the covenants, the violation notice, and a spreadsheet I made that listed every time Heather or another board member had used a phone held inches from my face to film residents during confrontations. I printed everything and put it in a binder tabbed by date. I also emailed the management company again and copied the board. This time I included the screenshots of Heather on my neighbor's porch and asked them to clarify whether board members were exempt from the privacy standards they claimed to enforce. No one replied, but the email sat in my sent folder like a ticking bomb. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community center meeting room. I arrived 15 minutes early with my binder and my laptop. Greg was already there, along with 2 other neighbors I recognized from the portal thread. Heather sat at the head of the table with 3 other board members. She wore the same fuchsia blazer she had worn on my driveway, and she had a stack of printed screenshots in front of her. She did not look at me when I walked in. She started the meeting by reading a prepared statement about the importance of maintaining community standards and protecting the privacy of residents. She said that my cameras created a hostile environment and that my refusal to remove them demonstrated contempt for the rules. I raised my hand. She ignored me. I raised it again. She finally nodded, and I stood up. I told the board that I had reviewed the covenants and that security cameras were explicitly permitted as long as they did not record neighboring properties. I pulled out my binder and flipped to the first tab. I handed a copy of the covenant page to each board member. Heather glanced at it, then pushed it aside. "Read the standards," she said. "The standards are clear." I asked her which standard I had violated. She said that the nuisance clause covered any modification that created discomfort or inconvenience for other residents. I asked if she had any evidence that my cameras recorded anything beyond my property line. She said that the perception of surveillance was enough. Greg stood up. He said that he had lived in Vista Verde for 6 years and that Heather had never enforced the nuisance clause fairly. He pointed out that 3 board members had Ring doorbells and that Heather herself had been photographed using her phone to film residents without their consent. Heather cut him off. She said that board members acting in their official capacity were exempt from rules that applied to general residents. Greg laughed. He asked where that exemption was written. Heather did not answer. Instead, she said that the hearing was about my violation, not about the board, and that any further interruptions would result in ejection from the meeting. I told the board that I had proof she could not explain, and I pulled out my laptop. I opened a folder and turned the screen toward the table. Heather leaned forward. She asked what I was showing. I said that I had the portal edit history, and that it showed she had edited her original post about my cameras 4 times in the first hour after publishing it. The original version did not mention privacy. It only said that my cameras were unapproved modifications. The privacy language was added later, after another resident commented that the covenants allowed cameras. Heather's face went red. She said that editing a post for clarity was not a violation of anything. I said that it proved she was making up the rules as she went, and that her decision as final line was a way to shut down anyone who questioned her. One of the other board members, a man named Tom, cleared his throat. He said that he had not been aware that the covenants explicitly permitted cameras. He asked Heather if she had consulted the management company before issuing the violation. Heather said that the board had discretion to interpret the covenants in the best interest of the community. Tom asked if there was any documentation of that interpretation. Heather said that the documentation was the violation notice itself. Tom looked at me, then at the binder I had placed on the table. He asked if he could review it. I handed it over. Tom spent 5 minutes flipping through the tabs. He read the screenshots of Heather filming residents. He read the covenant page. He read my email to the management company. When he finished, he set the binder down and looked at Heather. He said that he did not see evidence that the cameras violated any rule, and that the nuisance claim was subjective at best. Heather stood up. She said that the board had already voted to uphold the violation, and that my refusal to comply would result in fines starting at midnight. Tom said he did not recall a vote. Heather said it had been conducted by email. Tom asked to see the email thread. Heather said she would provide it later. Tom said that later was not acceptable and that he wanted to see it now. Heather did not produce the email thread. Instead, she said that the meeting was adjourned and that the board would reconvene in executive session. Greg stood up and said that executive sessions were supposed to be announced in advance. Heather ignored him and walked out of the room. The other board members looked at each other, then followed her. Tom stayed behind. He told me that he would push for a revote and that I should not remove the cameras until the board issued a final decision in writing. He said that Heather had been running the board like her personal fiefdom for 2 years, and that he was tired of it. I thanked him and left the building. The next morning, I received a final demand letter in the mail. It was dated the day before the hearing, which meant Heather had sent it before the meeting even happened. The letter stated that I had failed to cure the violation within the required time frame, and that daily fines of $50 would begin at midnight on the date of the hearing. It also said that if the fines exceeded $500, the board would file a lien on my property. I read it twice. Then I called an attorney. The attorney said that HOA liens were enforceable in North Carolina, and that I needed to fight this before it went on my credit report. She said that the best approach was to demand a formal hearing with the full board and to bring documentation that proved selective enforcement. I told her I already had the documentation, and she said I was ahead of the game. I posted the final demand letter on the portal that afternoon. I did not editorialize. I just uploaded a photo of the letter and wrote, "This was mailed before the hearing even took place." Within an hour, the thread had 100 comments. People were furious. Someone dug up the bylaws and posted the section that required the board to hold a formal hearing before imposing fines exceeding $25. Another person posted a timeline showing that Heather had issued the violation, scheduled the hearing, and sent the demand letter all within 48 hours, which violated the 30-day notice requirement in the covenants. The thread turned into a pile-on, and Heather went silent again. 2 days later, the management company sent an email to the entire community. It said that the board had requested a review of the camera violation and that management had determined the rule was misapplied. The email stated that security cameras were permitted under the covenants as long as they complied with local privacy laws, and that residents were not required to obtain approval before installing them. The email also said that any fines issued in connection with the camera violation were rescinded, and that the board would not pursue further action. I read the email 3 times to make sure I understood it. Then I forwarded it to my attorney and told her I would not need her services after all. Heather called an emergency board meeting that night. I was not invited, but Greg was, because he had filed a formal complaint about selective enforcement the week before. He texted me updates from the parking lot. He said that Tom had confronted Heather in front of the other board members and demanded to know why she had issued a violation without consulting management first. Heather said that she had relied on her interpretation of the nuisance clause, and that management had overstepped by contradicting the board. Tom said that management was required to enforce the covenants as written, and that Heather had invented a rule that did not exist. One of the other board members said that the portal backlash was making Vista Verde look like a joke, and that they needed to distance themselves from the camera fight before it got worse. Heather said that the board had a duty to protect the community from surveillance and that she would not back down. Tom said that the decision as final line she kept using was exactly the problem, and that it was time for her to step aside. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. Heather did not step aside. Instead, she doubled down. She posted a long statement on the portal accusing management of caving to pressure from a vocal minority, and she said that the board would be reviewing all security camera installations in the community to ensure compliance with the spirit of the covenants. The post got 20 comments in the first 10 minutes, and all of them were negative. People accused her of wasting time on petty grievances while real issues like potholes and broken streetlights went unfixed. Someone pointed out that Heather had spent more time filming residents than attending to her actual duties. Another person said that the board needed new leadership. Heather deleted the post an hour later, but by then, screenshots had been shared in 3 different neighborhood group chats. The side complication hit 2 days after that. My doorbell cam caught something embarrassing, and the portal exploded all over again. A board member named Linda had been walking her dog past my house at 6 in the morning, and the motion sensor triggered a recording. The footage showed Linda stopping in front of my driveway, looking around, and then letting her dog pee on my mailbox post. It was a small thing, but Linda had been one of the board members who piled on in the original thread about my cameras invading privacy. Someone got hold of the footage and posted it with the caption, "Interesting how privacy concerns disappear when it is convenient." The thread went nuclear. People demanded that Linda resign. Heather tried to defend her by saying that the footage had been obtained without consent, but that only made it worse because it proved that my cameras were recording public behavior, not private moments. Greg called me that afternoon and told me that 3 board members had privately asked him if he would consider running for a seat in the next election. He said that the Linda incident had been the final straw for a lot of people, and that there was a growing movement to vote out anyone who had supported Heather's enforcement campaign. I told him I was not interested in being on the board, but that I would support anyone who wanted to clean house. Greg said he was thinking about it, and that he would let me know. In the meantime, he suggested I keep my cameras running and document everything, because Heather was not done yet. He was right. 3 days later, I received another notice. This one was not about cameras. It said that my trash cans had been left visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, which violated the covenant requiring bins to be stored out of sight. The fine was $25. I checked the timestamp on my doorbell footage. I had brought the cans in at 7 that evening, which was 11 hours after pickup. The notice was dated the next morning, which meant Heather had driven by specifically to check. I took a screenshot of the footage, printed the notice, and added both to my binder. Then I posted the notice on the portal with the caption, "Day 11 hours after pickup." You decide if this is reasonable. The thread got 60 comments in an hour, and most of them were people sharing their own stories of Heather driving around the neighborhood looking for violations. Tom sent me an email that night. He said that he had reviewed the trash can complaint and that it did not meet the threshold for a fine because the covenant allowed up to 24 hours for bins to be stored. He said he had overruled the fine and that I would not be charged. He also said that he had filed a formal complaint with the management company about Heather's pattern of retaliatory enforcement, and that management was conducting an internal review. I replied and thanked him. Then I forwarded the email to Greg and told him that things were finally moving in the right direction. The final showdown happened 2 weeks later. The management company called a special meeting at the community center meeting room to address the complaints about selective enforcement and board conduct. Every resident was invited, and the room was packed. Heather sat at the front with the remaining board members. Tom sat next to her, but he did not look at her. A representative from the management company, a woman named Karen, stood at a podium and explained that the review had found multiple instances of inconsistent rule enforcement, and that the board had issued fines and violations without following the procedures outlined in the covenants. She said that all fines issued in the past 6 months would be reviewed, and that any fine found to be procedurally deficient would be rescinded. Heather stood up. She said that the board had acted in good faith to protect the community and that the management company was undermining their authority. Karen said that the covenants were the authority and that the board was required to follow them. Heather said that the covenants gave the board discretion to interpret the rules. Karen said that discretion did not mean inventing rules that did not exist and that the camera violation was a clear example of overreach. Heather said that the violation was based on the nuisance clause. Karen pulled out a printed copy of the covenants and read the nuisance clause out loud. It defined nuisance as any activity that created noise, odor, or physical obstruction. Security cameras did not fit the definition. Heather said that the clause was meant to be interpreted broadly. Karen said that broad interpretation required board consensus, and that there was no record of a vote. Tom stood up. He said that he had requested the email thread Heather claimed documented the vote, and that she had never provided it. He said he had reviewed his own emails and found no evidence that a vote had taken place. He asked Heather to produce the thread now, in front of everyone. Heather said that she did not have access to her email at the moment. Tom said that was not an acceptable answer, and that the meeting could wait while she retrieved it. Heather sat down and pulled out her phone. She scrolled for a minute, then said that she could not find the thread. Tom said that if the thread did not exist, then the vote did not happen, and the violation was invalid from the start. Greg stood up and asked if he could speak. Karen nodded. Greg said that he had filed a complaint 6 months ago about a fine he received for parking his truck in his driveway, and that he had never received a response from the board. He said that the fine was still on his account, and that it was preventing him from using the community amenities. Karen said that the parking fine would be reviewed as part of the process, and that if it was found to be invalid, it would be removed and any penalties reversed. Heather said that the parking fine was legitimate because commercial vehicles were prohibited. Greg said his truck was not commercial, and that the covenant defined commercial vehicles as those displaying business signage or exceeding a certain weight limit. His truck had neither. Heather said that the board had determined his truck looked commercial. Karen said that looking commercial was not the standard, and that the fine would be rescinded. I stood up. I said that I wanted to add one more piece of evidence to the record, and I pulled out my laptop. I opened the folder with the portal edit history and turned the screen toward the podium. I explained that Heather had edited her original post about my cameras 4 times in the first hour, and that the privacy language was added only after she realized the covenant allowed cameras. I said that the edit history proved she was changing the rules to fit her narrative, and that the decision is final line she used at the hearing was a way to intimidate residents into compliance. Karen asked if I could email her the screenshots. I said I could. Heather said that editing a post was not a violation of anything. Karen said it was evidence of intent, and that it would be included in the final report. I sat down, and the room erupted in applause. Heather looked around, her face red. She said that the meeting was a witch hunt, and that she would not sit there and be humiliated. She stood up and walked toward the door. Tom called after her and said that if she left, she would be considered to have resigned from the board. Heather stopped. She turned around and said that she had given 2 years of her life to Vista Verde, and that the community did not deserve her service. Then she walked out. The room went silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping again, and the applause spread. Tom looked at Karen and asked what happened next. Karen said that the board would need to hold an election to fill the vacant seat, and that in the meantime the remaining members would continue to serve. She said that the final report on the enforcement review would be distributed within 2 weeks, and that any resident who believed they had been unfairly fined could submit an appeal. The lien threat was withdrawn immediately. I received an email from the management company the next morning confirming that all fines related to the camera violation had been rescinded, and that my account balance was 0. The email also said that the board had voted to update the enforcement procedures to require management approval before issuing any fine exceeding $25, and that all future violations would include a 30-day cure period with written notice. I forwarded the email to Greg, and he replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a message that said he was running for the board in the next election. I told him he had my vote. The portal quieted down after that. A few people posted thank you messages directed at Tom and the management company. Someone started a thread about organizing a community cleanup day, and it got 20 volunteers in the first hour. Heather did not post again. I heard from another neighbor that she had put her house on the market 2 weeks after the meeting, and that she was moving to a different neighborhood in South Carolina. I did not feel bad about it. She had made my life hell for 3 months over a camera that never recorded anything beyond my own driveway, and she had used the portal to weaponize the community against me. If she wanted to start over somewhere else, that was her choice. I kept the cameras up. I also kept the binder, just in case. The new board, which included Greg after the election, voted to formalize the camera policy and add it to the covenants as an amendment. The amendment stated that security cameras were permitted as long as they complied with local privacy laws and did not record the interior of neighboring properties. It passed with 80% approval from the community. Heather was not around to see it. but I like to think she heard about it wherever she ended up. Greg and I became friends after everything settled down. We would meet for coffee every couple of weeks and talk about board business, neighborhood gossip, and whatever else came up. He told me that the board had received 3 more complaints about selective enforcement in the months after Heather left, and that all 3 had been resolved quickly because the new procedures required documentation and a review process. He said that Vista Verde felt different now, less tense, more like an actual community instead of a surveillance state. I agreed. I also told him that I had started checking the portal less often, because it was not a battlefield anymore. It was just a place where people posted about lost cats and yard sales. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up. It was Tom. He got out and walked over, and I stood up to meet him. He said he wanted to thank me for standing up to Heather, because it had forced the board to face the fact that they had let her run wild for too long. He said that the community was better off without her, and that the new policies were already making a difference. I told him that I appreciated the support he had given me during the hearings, and that I was glad the board was moving in a better direction. He shook my hand and said that if I ever wanted to run for the board, I would have his endorsement. I laughed and said I would think about it, but I was pretty happy just keeping my cameras running and staying out of the drama. A few months later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short. It said, "You win. Enjoy your cameras." I did not recognize the number, but I knew who it was. I deleted the message and went back to whatever I was doing. Heather was gone, the fines were gone, and my ability to pay my mortgage without surprise fees was secure. That was all I needed. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.